Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, November 27th, 2025. All right, first thing, happy Thanksgiving, everybody. This is the last show of the week. I'm going to be writing a little bit on Thanksgiving, and we'll be putting out a page for Friday if you want to check the news at antiwar.com. But there will be no show. I'll be back Sunday night recording the show to put out the Monday morning show. So anyway, let's get into the news for today. The first story at the top of antiwar.com today, U.S. plan for housing on Israeli side of Gaza. So the Trump administration is pushing a plan that would involve the construction of temporary housing compounds for Palestinians on the Israeli-occupied side of Gaza, and this was reported by the New York Times. The planning for the camps, which would house Palestinians pre-screened by Israeli intelligence, is being led by a guy named Ari Lightstone, who previously served as an advisor for former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman. So you can't get more, pro-Israel than this guy who is involved in these plans. The Times report said that other U.S. officials involved in the planning came from the Department of Government Efficiency, known as DOGE, and they're working out of a luxury beachfront hotel in Tel Aviv where rooms run more than $700 per night, which does not seem very efficient to me, but they're working on the beach on this very dystopian plan for Gaza. And Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law, who has been deeply involved in Gaza negotiations, has also been pushing the plan to start building in the Israeli-occupied side of Gaza as a way to pressure Hamas. This is something we've been covering and talking about a lot, but there's some new details here. So Arab and European officials have warned that the plan could solidify the Israeli occupation of more than 50% of Gaza's territory and turn the yellow line into a de facto border. And the plan also does nothing to address the dire situation for the civilians in the Hamas-controlled side of Gaza, where the U.S. and Israel are not allowing reconstruction to take place. The vast majority of the estimated 2 million civilians living in Gaza are on the Hamas-controlled side. I think it might be a few hundred or maybe a few thousand who are living or being with the Israeli-backed militias and gangs on the IDF side. But this U.S. plan that's being floated would involve building several compounds that could hold about 25,000 people each, which even if they did this and the people were willing to go live in this side of Gaza and be screened by the IDF, which seems pretty unlikely considering what the IDF has been doing to them for the past 2 years. But even if they're willing to do it and they build a few of these camps, it's just going to be a fraction of the civilians. It could only house a fraction of the civilians in Gaza. And the idea is to provide housing that is more substantial than tents, but still temporary, such as trailers, container homes, or prefabricated homes. The Times report said that some officials have raised concerns that the housing compounds would feel like internment camps, which that's what this plan sounds a lot like. The idea here is to build internment camps. Israeli officials have said that once the Palestinians enter the areas, that they should not be able to leave. And U.S. officials are considering using the so-called International Stabilization Force, which is supposed to be created under the Trump Gaza plan. They're saying that they could use this force for security for these camps, but there's been no progress on getting that force deployed because the countries that were willing to be involved, they don't want to go into Gaza and fight Hamas basically on behalf of Israel. So the Trump administration has reportedly been in contact with the Israeli-backed militias and gangs who operate on the Israeli side of the yellow line about enforcing order in Gaza. And one of these gangs is led by this guy Yasser Abu Shabab, who admitted in 2024 that his group was looting aid trucks, and members of his gang have ties to ISIS, or including at least one that fought with ISIS in Egypt in the Sinai insurgency. So, yeah, I know a lot of these details we've kind of covered a lot, but I think it's, as they move forward on this, I really do think that any kind of construction like this is just going to lead to the solidification of this Israeli occupation of more than half of Gaza. And U.S. officials told the Times that Israeli forces are expected to begin clearing rubble for the first compound to be built in Rafah, southern Gaza, and it's unclear who will fund the construction of the first camp, which is expected to cost tens of millions of dollars. So it's expected to cost tens of millions of dollars for each of these camps or compounds. And who's going to end up footing the bill for that? All right, so the next one here, Israeli defense minister threatens new war with Lebanon. So this is an article from Jason Ditz. So Israeli defense minister Israel Katz, who has long resisted anything resembling a settlement in the ongoing conflict with Lebanon, has threatened to launch a new war against the country if Lebanon hasn't fully disarmed Hezbollah by year's end. So he's saying a new war if they don't disarm within a month and a few days, which obviously is just not going to happen. Katz vowed that there would be no calm in Beirut, citing the recent attack on the capital, so essentially threatening more attacks on Lebanon's capital. Such a disarmament by that deadline is effectively impossible, as I said. And so we've seen, and Jason, just mentions how nominally there's been a ceasefire in Lebanon over the past year. But as we have seen in Gaza, Israel has just continued attacks, continued the occupation of parts of southern Lebanon. They've maintained 5 military outposts there, and we've seen constant attacks, and they've escalated them recently in issuing all these threats. And the U.S. is basically going along with these Israeli threats here. All right, so the next one here, why Israel is launching another military operation in the West Bank. So the Israeli military on Wednesday announced a new major military operation in the northern occupied West Bank. And this article is from Mondo Weiss. And essentially, Israel saying that they're going in there to crack down on resistance factions. But this cites local sources who are saying, in this area that they've started the offensive is where they're planning to expand settlements and build a new access road for the settlements. And essentially what they're saying is that the real purpose of this military operation is to secure that area so there's no, they don't have any issues when they start the reconstruction. Not the reconstruction, the construction of the settlement road and then build the settlements and things. So the Israeli army announced that it was launching a military operation in the northern West Bank, concentrating on a handful of villages and towns outside the city of Tubas. Israeli forces moved into Tubas Governorate on Wednesday, deploying units from the Manesh, Shamron, and Commando brigades. The Israeli army said on X that it aims to reinforce control over the area as part of broader operations in the northern West Bank, claiming that the Tubas operation is intended to prevent the reformation of armed resistance groups in the governorate. But local sources tell Mondo Weiss this is just a pretext. The real reason for the wide-ranging mobilization of military forces is to lay the groundwork for confiscating large swaths of land for an upcoming settlement project. And so we've seen, again, a major operation started here in these northern towns. Soldiers entered with additional troops, bulldozers, Apache helicopters, which opened fire toward residential areas. According to Tubas's mayor, this is the first time since the Second Intifada that Israeli helicopters have been used in a military operation in this part of the West Bank. And they get into some more of the details here of the land confiscation. A local source who spoke with Mondo Weiss on the condition of anonymity said the real objective of the operation is land confiscation for the expansion of settlements. The source said, quote, "The army is using these claims to facilitate settlement expansion in Tubas and the Jordan Valley. They want to ensure that there will be no reaction from residents once the actual construction of the road begins, which will entail the confiscation of land on the ground," end quote. On November 22nd, the Wall and Settlement Resistance Commission reported that Israeli authorities had seized 1,042 dunams of Palestinian land in the northern Jordan Valley through 9 land seizures orders for military purposes. And we see these land grabs going on quite often lately. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. bombs Somalia for the 101st time of the year. So U.S. Africa Command on Wednesday confirmed that it launched another airstrike in Somalia on Tuesday, the same day that Somali media reported that U.S. troops took part in a ground raid on a cave and fought against ISIS militants on the ground in the northeastern Puntland region. AFRICOM said the strike targeted Somalia's ISIS affiliate and was launched about 40 miles southeast of the Gulf of Aden port city of Bosaso, the same area where the fighting occurred. The command offered no other details about the attack, as they usually do. And And so, as I mentioned yesterday, we've had these reports from Somali media, and not just reports from Somali media, but also the U.S.-backed forces in the region said that U.S. troops were involved in the operation. And we saw similar reports on X. And an AFRICOM official, because I asked them, can you confirm that these ground operations took place? And I got this quote from an AFRICOM official that says, quote, reports circulating on social media about U.S. forces participating in a ground raid are not accurate. We do not have any additional details about the reporting to share, end quote. So this is what if you actually look at the statement, it's actually not a denial that U.S. troops were fighting on the ground. They're just saying that the reports about U.S. forces participating in a ground raid on social media are not accurate. But it's, I actually didn't ask them about social media reports. It was reporting in Somali media citing security sources and what the actual Puntland forces said. But either way, they confirmed the airstrike, and they said that they've launched 101 in Somalia this year, and 59 of them targeted this ISIS affiliate in Puntland. So in Puntland, ISIS, is the bad guys. In other parts in Syria, I guess they still claim that they're fighting ISIS in Syria while also allying with Al-Qaeda guys and Jalani or Shara, who is actually an ally of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the founder of ISIS. But anyway, that's all complicated stuff. But so again, 101 airstrikes, and we'll get into the next story here. So the U.S. is aware of reports that it killed a Somali civilian clan elder. So U.S. Africa Command is aware of reports that it killed a civilian Somali clan elder in an airstrike that was launched in Somalia's northern Sanaag region on September 13th. The command told antiwar.com in an email on Tuesday. AFRICOM has claimed that the airstrike killed an al-Shabaab weapons dealer, but that has been strongly denied by family members and local officials who say the strike killed Abdullah Omar Abdi, a prominent clan leader known for his efforts at peacemaking in the region. Al-Shabaab has also denied that Abdi was a member of the militant group. So I wanted to write this, kind of just refresh this story, because last month there was some reports from Somali media that I had missed, quoting security, local Somali officials as well as family members. Just, it's, to me, it seems very clear that this guy was not a part of Al-Shabaab. So this is Faisal Abdillahi. He is the Sanaag region's intelligence chief. He said last month, quote, "This was an unexpected and shocking incident. A man driving his car was bombed from the air. We, the officials, had no prior knowledge or warning. The deceased was a prominent figure who worked closely with the community. We don't understand why he was targeted," end quote. Abdillahi also said that there was no evidence Abdi was linked to Al-Shabaab. He said, quote, "We have never heard of any terrorist charges against him. People are now terrified whenever they hear aircraft overhead. We need to know why he was killed and who authorized it," end quote. On October 7th, the Horn Observer reported that family members erected a memorial at the site of the airstrike to honor Abdi. And his brother said, quote, "Our brother was a respected elder, not a terrorist. The U.S. killed an innocent man without proof or remorse. He preached peace, not war. Now his blood stains our soil," end quote. You can see these pictures here. They erected this monument right next to his car that was blown up. So at the site of the airstrike. And Abdi's wife called for accountability. She said, quote, "We want justice. We want the world to know that our pain was caused by a drone, not by fate," end quote. There's also Brigadier General Abdullah Omar Onshore, the commander of a battalion in the Puntland Dervish Force, which is the main military wing of the Puntland government. He said that Abdi had just met with Puntland's president before he was killed. Quote, "He was a peacemaker who helped defend Puntland during conflicts with Al-Shabaab and ISIS. His killing was illegal and unjust. He had been in Bosaso for 20 days and had even met President Saeed Abdullah Deni. If he were guilty of anything, he would have been arrested, not bombed." So when asked about the comments from local officials and family members about Abdi, AFRICOM's public affairs operations told antiwar.com, quote, "We are aware of the reporting related to this strike. We do not have anything additional or new for you at this time," end quote. And then they also claim that they take all reports of possible civilian casualties seriously. But the fact is there's just no media coverage. There's no oversight. There's no pressure at all on AFRICOM to really follow up on this stuff. And I get into some of the background here in the story that you're all very, very aware of. But another interesting detail, which has popped into my head since we've been talking about how the UAE is sending weapons to the RSF in Sudan through Puntland, through Bosaso, is that locals in this area, I mean, locals were out. There was a lot of outrage. There was protests. They didn't initially blame the U.S. They initially blamed the UAE because the UAE is known to conduct drone strikes in Somalia. And this guy, Abdi, was very opposed to a minerals deal that the Puntland government was pursuing with the UAE. And then he was killed. And again, the U.S. took credit for this attack in this area, which they rarely bomb, if they've ever even bombed it before. I'm not sure. It's right to the west of Puntland. But and they claimed it was an Al-Shabaab weapons dealer, which again just seems completely false based on all the testimony from family, locals, officials, and Al-Shabaab. So who told him that he was an Al-Shabaab weapons dealer? Where did they get that intelligence? I did ask AFRICOM that. Of course, they didn't tell me that. But I mean, I don't know. I'm going to try to keep looking into this story here, which just got no notice in American media besides us. All right, so the next one here, France and the UK insist on troops to Ukraine. So France and the UK are still insisting that troops from NATO countries must be deployed to Ukraine as part of a potential peace deal, an idea that Russia, of course, has repeatedly rejected. French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer chaired a virtual meeting on Tuesday night of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, referring to countries willing to deploy troops to post-war Ukraine. And according to Politico, Marco Rubio took part in this call. But he said that the U.S., he reportedly told the Europeans that the U.S. Wants a peace deal before they agree to any kind of security guarantees, which is interesting because maybe the strategy is because the security guarantees are going to be kind of a sticking point. Maybe they just want to work out a deal and then work that out later. I don't really know how that's going to work. But anyway, that's what he told them, so it's good that at least he's not sitting there saying, yeah, send troops. Starmer said during the meeting that a multinational force will play a vital role in guaranteeing Ukraine's security. On Wednesday, Bloomberg reported that British officials said the UK has already identified the military units it would send into Ukraine after a series of reconnaissance visits in the country. And during the meeting on Tuesday, Macron suggested that the troops could be deployed in Kiev and in parts of western Ukraine so they're not near the front lines, but Russian officials have made very clear they would never accept this. So what they're doing here, I mean, I think they're just trying to sabotage the deal. I mean, there's no way they could be that stupid to think that Russia is going to go for this, when they could just, Russia seems perfectly content with continuing the war, continuing to gain pieces of territory, bit by bit. And it's very clear that as long as the war goes on, the terms are going to get worse for Ukraine, and they're still going out and pushing these ideas. I think it's clear, like the European leaders, with few exception, like Orban in Hungary and Fico in Slovakia, but they just want this war to continue. I think that's very clear. All right, so the next one here, this is something else. So I mentioned this yesterday. I just had to write it up because it's so absurd. So Rep. Salazar says that the U.S. must go in Venezuela for oil. So amid the U.S. push toward a war to oust Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, Representative Maria Salazar, a Republican from Florida, has made the argument that the U.S. must go into Venezuela so American oil companies can have a field day since the country sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. She said, quote, Venezuela, for those Americans who do not understand why we need to go in, Venezuela for the American oil companies will be a field day because it will be more than $1 trillion in economic activity, end quote. I don't think that's really how you sell Americans on wars, is to tell them, hey, we got to go in because the oil companies are going to get rich. Salazar also said that the U.S. must go to war with Venezuela because it has become a launching pad for people who hate the U.S., and this is the language she used, claiming that Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas are active in the country. And I think I mentioned this yesterday, but just the most absurd thing I've heard in a while She said that Maduro was giving uranium. She's just like rattling off these talking points. And she says Maduro was giving uranium to Hamas and to Iran and to North Korea and Nicaragua, just throwing them all out there. And Salazar's third reason for going to war with Venezuela is the claim that Maduro is the leader of the Cartel of the Suns, which doesn't exist, as we've covered a lot. It's just not a real organization. And, they're using this group, which initially started out as a couple of Venezuelan generals in the 90s who were trafficking cocaine in cooperation with the CIA. That was like the nickname that they got because the Venezuelan generals have sun insignias on their uniforms. But essentially now it's just used as a term to describe, corruption and an alleged network of Venezuelan military officials who are accused of being involved in drug trafficking. But it's not an organization. It's not a real organization, yet they're claiming Maduro is the head, and they're trying to use this as a phony pretext to start a war. And, you see, so Salazar, she comes at us with the oil, but also just lies. There's so many lies just being thrown in our face here, including from Maria Corina Machado, who is the Venezuelan opposition leader and this year's Nobel Peace Prize winner. So since she's gotten that Nobel Peace Prize, she has been agitating for the U.S. to invade Venezuela, to start a war with her country, which she claims it'll be a cakewalk. You'll go in, you'll be greeted as liberators, essentially is what the arguments that she's making. And she's been spreading nonsense, and the New York Times reported actually about how she's spreading false claims about Maduro. The thing that got them angry is that she claimed Maduro's has rigged elections in the U.S. And apparently I saw another report a couple weeks ago, I couldn't find it, that said Rubio has relayed that claim to Trump, trying to say, Maduro was involved in rigging the 2020 election. But this story from the New York Times also gets into how the Cartel of the Suns thing is completely misrepresented. So, the people who want this war, they're lying to us. They're lying to get their way, to get, what could be what would be, no matter how it goes down, would be just a total disaster. All right, so the next one here, 2 National Guard troops shot in D.C. So this article is from AP News. So 2 West Virginia National Guard members who deployed to the nation's capital were shot Wednesday afternoon, just blocks from the White House, in a brazen act of violence that the mayor described as a targeted attack. FBI Director Kash Patel and Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser said that they were hospitalized in critical condition. Initially, the governor of West Virginia, because these guardsmen were from West Virginia, said that they were dead. Again, said that it was confirmed, and then he put out another tweet saying, actually, we're getting conflicting reports, but it looks like as of now, Wednesday night, they're still alive, but in critical condition. And the suspect who was in custody was also shot and had wounds that were not believed to be life-threatening, according to a law enforcement official who is not authorized to discuss the matter publicly. The 29-year-old suspect, an Afghan national, entered the U.S. in 2021 through Operation Allies Welcome, a Biden administration program that evacuated and resettled tens of thousands of Afghans after the U.S. withdrew from the country, officials said. So that's what they're saying. This guy's from Afghanistan, and one of the people, they were bringing in people who were part of the U.S.-backed government there, tens of thousands of people. And apparently that's where this guy came from. Nothing on his motive or anything yet. But this, so the initiative brought roughly 76,000 people to the U.S., many of whom had worked alongside U.S. troops and diplomats as interpreters and translators. It has since faced intense scrutiny from Trump and his allies. But the timing of this, so this is the Trump's National Guard deployment to D.C. Just recently, a federal judge ruled that it was illegal, and they were planning to pull him out. And then this happens, and it happened, you could see on the map, right near the White House. And now Trump is sending 500 more National Guard troops to patrol the streets of D.C. after this happened. So hopefully the guardsmen who were shot make it, pull through, don't die here. And also the shooter was wounded, but they're saying he's not in critical condition or anything. All right, so the next one here, the last story. Army officers seize power in Guinea-Bissau Bissau. So this article's from Al Jazeera. So there was another coup in West Africa. And if you're thinking, wasn't there a coup already in Guinea-Bissau? Well, this isn't Guinea. This is Guinea-Bissau. So Guinea was the French colony. Guinea-Bissau to the north was a smaller Portuguese colony. And a group of military officers in Guinea-Bissau has claimed total control of the country a day after two leading candidates in a tightly contested presidential election each declared victory, calling themselves the High Military Command for the Restoration of Order. The officers read out a statement on television on Wednesday declaring that they had ordered the immediate suspension of the electoral process until further notice. They also ordered the closure of all land, air, and sea borders and an overnight curfew. The move came shortly after sustained gunfire was heard near the Election Commission's headquarters, the Presidential Palace, and the Ministry of the Interior capital, Bissau. So the results of Sunday's presidential vote, which pitted President Umaro Sissoko Embalo against his primary challenger, Fernando Diaz, had been expected to be announced on Thursday in the West African nation. And Embalo said that he has been deposed and that he was currently at the General Staff headquarters. So, again, another coup in West Africa, another military coup. There's been a few other attempted coups in this country before. We'll see if this one sticks, if the military stays in power for a while. But, one thing, so we've been, West Africa, what are the countries? We've seen coups in recent years in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali. I know there's others that aren't coming to my mind right now. But, these are Western, in a lot of these countries, they're Western-backed governments. And one of the gripes that these military officers who took power had with the governments, I know in some cases at least, was the failure against like the fight against jihadists in Mali and Burkina Faso. And, these were U.S.-supported missions, especially in Niger. The U.S. had a huge drone base there. And it's, I know Nick Turse from The Intercept has done good reporting on this, like the increase in terrorism and Al-Qaeda and ISIS-linked groups in these areas where the U.S. was involved in, what they call counterterrorism. These groups just like have flourished. And I know that is one gripe. When it comes to Guinea-Bissau, I really don't know much about the country or the situation. So, I don't really know the main motives here, but it's just, as they're talking about Nigeria, the, potential U.S. intervention in Nigeria, it's an area to keep an eye on. All right. So that is it for the news for today. And speaking of Nigeria, there was the big kidnapping at a Catholic school. I think it was 300 something people were kidnapped according to the reports. And I think 50 children were able to evade kidnapping. So that's been in the news a lot lately, and this push for like a U.S. intervention, again, like that's going to solve things there. But anyway, that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from David Stockman, Why the Meandering Borders of Ukraine Are No Hill for America First to Die On. One from Mattia Kramer, An Unexpected Con to End Free Speech. One from Michael Elner, How to Topple Elliot Abrams' Delusion. One from Lori Calhoun, On the Legitimate Authority to Kill. And our spotlight from Eldar Mamdov, The Europeans Pushing the NATO Poison Pill. So please go check all that out. Read the lower section. Go check out the blog. Lots of content to read. And again, I hope everyone has a good Thanksgiving. I know most of the people who watch and listen to this show are American. I know there's some Europeans, some Canadians, a couple people in Asia. If you're from a different country, let me know in the comments. Let me know where you're from. But I hope everyone who's celebrating has a good holiday and is able to spend it with their family, or is, if you got to work. I'm going to be working a little bit. I don't have like a real, I sit at home and work on my computer, so it's not bad. I used to work a real job where I would be away from home on the holidays a lot. But anyway, again, I hope everyone has a good weekend. I will be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.